I have a question for Chaim, because there were rare cases. Mm-hmm. There is in Yiddish a term called Alphonse. Alphonse is a procurer or pimp. And there were young, good-looking men in Eastern Europe that used to court young ladies, say, I'm going to marry you, and then they come to America, they have sex, she's already hand on the buzzer, she's defiled.
I've written about it.
And they put, no, and then many people, I mean, I put in an AJ's review, and then they're in brothels. And they would do it to a few women, and we know that they were organized because they had a Landsmannschaft. In Buenos Aires, they had Migdal Tzvi, it was a Landsmannschaft of the pimps. In New York, they had something similar. So do you think the Galeria
women pimp? Like
yeah, of course. Rosier, that's what Arthur Goren wrote.
Yeah.
So the question is, do you think there is that part of the Verschwundene Männer that there is? Again, they're not the majority.
It's very. I thought at the beginning, when I began my research, I thought I'll go to look for it in newspapers. I'll find some 200, 300 cases. I found about 6,000 cases in newspapers and another 4,000 cases in archives, in rabbinical stuff, etc., etc., etc. In some cases, it was true. By the way, I'm going to give a conference, a talk on Agunot in Eretz Israel, and one of them was a pimp. He did it to a few women, and there is a letter about him that he does it for a few women. But it is rare. In most cases, I found that in Eastern Europe, for example, about 35% of the cases that the husband disappeared, he didn't decide to disappear, he just died. And his body was not found, and she couldn't get out of the marriage, and other cases. So only about 65% of the cases are desertion. In America, it's about 90%. And what I found, and I was puzzled by it, because I thought, as everybody did, that Agunot in America, meaning that the husband left the wife in Eastern Europe and came to America. Arthur Herzberg wrote about it in his book very early, in the 70s, claiming that 100,000 Jews left their wife in Eastern. But what I found that 90% of the cases of women deserted in America were deserted in America. The couple came from Eastern Europe and then deserted her. So it's a totally, it's actually not because of immigration, but because of coping with the hardship of immigration. This is more the case. But pimps, it exists, but it's a rarity. They also exist in Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, the common case, you wanted to find a girl to promise to marry, you just have to follow the newspaper. You saw that somebody published an advertisement that is seeking for a nanny for his children. And if you were rich, many women came from the country, wanted, but only one got a job. And the pimp was staying outside, picking up the prettiest one, consoling her, promising her to marry, etc., etc. And she is caught. So it's much more popular, by the way, in Eastern Europe, in Turkey, in the Middle East, than it was in America. In Eastern Europe and in the Middle East, pimping was a Jewish profession. In America, it was only partially Jewish profession. There were others. The Irish were as well Italians. Okay.
A question for Chaim. What do these women write about themselves in the letters? If you can talk to that, like what do they write about their struggles? Because now, I mean, we laughed a lot and said obviously about the very terrible situation they were in, and now you said, I mean, 90% were deserted in America, but the migration regulations, I think they, as a married woman, it was almost impossible to immigrate if your husband, if you were the dependent of a husband.
That's explained why in most cases they came to America and then deserted her.
Yeah.
So this is one of the main explanations why it happened, because very rarely he left her, and if she was looking for him, it was very, very difficult to her to get into America. unless she was, let's say, her brother immigrated and she was written in his passport as a member of the family, and it didn't mention that they were married. This is the only way you could get out of Russia and get into America, because women didn't have passports. So if you wanted to emigrate from Russia to America, and you were a woman, you had to be registered in somebody else's passport. That's the way why many pimps did it on the way to, especially to Argentina. But since we are talking in most cases that the couple came to America and then is deserted there, so this is not an issue. The first question, we hardly find any women that are very aware that have to give records. What is happening to me? She is looking for a practical way to handle a practical problem. So she gives you only the information that she needs to give. Now, when you read thousands of those cases, you tend to have a sense, what does she really mean? Because you see it in other cases. And you could see problems that I have no idea what to do, because I'm alone in a new country. But then, and women are very quick to understand it. Then she says, but I'm in America. I don't have to go to the rabbi. I can go and get a divorce.
City Hall.
At the City Hall. And that's what they do. And much of the information I know about America, Agunot in America, is from state records, from court records, because they asked the court to give a divorce.
How does that solve the Aguna state, though?
Sorry?
How does that solve the Aguna state, though?
Exactly what I mean, that the Aguna, the content of what Aguna is, ceased to be an halachic term and began to be a social term, a cultural term.
Wow.
I'm saying that since the early 20th century, when we talk about Aguna, we are not talking about Aguna in the sense that the husband disappeared, because it didn't disappear. In most of the cases, they found him. And nowadays, when you talk about Aguna, you talk about get refused. So you don't talk about the husband that is not there. So the Aguna became not a woman who is chained to her marriage, but a woman that is chained to her marriage because the law insists on it. That's why you can find nowadays only Agunot in two places. In Orthodox Jewish communities outside of Israel and in the state of Israel. Because the state of Israel says that the laws in the cases of marriage are the religious laws, be it the Arab, the Muslim, or the Christian, or the Jewish, it doesn't matter. But they accept the Jewish rules. So what determines what's an Aguna in Israel is the Jewish rule. But the contents of what Aguna is a totally different thing nowadays.
Okay. Second?
What I'm seeing from this panel, which is very, very interesting, is a relationship between what we could call church, state, and society, where maybe from 1648 onwards, the dissolving of the dominance of the church but the rise of a state authority. And the documents or the letters are portraying the relationship of a Jew being still very Jewish. And to what extent have you found any documents of the waning of Jewishness, but more in terms of a voluntary assimilation rather than what we have in sort of like Spain, which is a forced conversion? Are there any documents which are sort of like showing this? Because, for example, your letter showed 3.3 million Jews, and now there's only 6. So obviously there's masses of voluntary assimilation going on, which is very, very different from a comparison of Italy, where there was no Italy yet until Garibaldi of the 19th century, or Germany until also Bismarck. So what do you see in the documents of the relationship between Judaism and society, Judaism and church, Judaism and state, but on the voluntary assimilation side, the waning of the Judaism?
For the sources I'm working on, Jewish Tuscany, I found in economic space, in the economic sphere, a particular evidence about assimilation practices. For example, in butchery and market of flesh. And there's always in Petiliano, it was part of my doctoral dissertation, I found that there was Jewish Christian societies for butchery that managed shops for selling flesh each week, and Jewish butchers used to work according to the Christian owner of the shop, so he didn't do kashrut. And this created a big conflict inside the community, because these Jewish butchers worked with Christians, tried also to gain some space, some economic space in the ghetto, so to have more possibility to get new business inside the ghetto, but without kashrut. So that was very conflictual. So maybe it's a good example of this kind of assimilation in the economic sphere, in particular for my case of studies.
I can say something about assimilation in Russia. In 1844, the Russian government abolishes the Kahal. There is no more Kehila. And they do what is called Rav Mitam. They do like government-appointed rabbis. Now, the Jews here, they say, you know what, go suck an egg, we're going to have our parallel system. And then what you have is that in each town, even in small shtetl, you'll have two rabbis, the Mitam rabbi and the real rabbi. Now, what happens is that, you know, what you don't get with a stick, you get with honey. Once Alexander II comes to power, what his father, Nikolai I, with the Rekruchina, with all the Cantonist system, whatever, what he fails to do, his son says, you know what, we'll open the universities and you can actually leave the Pale of Settlement, bingo. And then you got, and by the 1860s, 1870s, you already have an elite of people who, some of them don't even speak Yiddish anymore. Some of them do.
Nathan wrote about it.
What?
Nathan wrote
Yeah,
about
Benjamin Nathan, Beyond the Pale. But even beyond that, that you start to have like cultural assimilation of people who, even people who later after 1881 are what Shula Volkov called dissimilation, that people who were assimilated then got slapped in the face. That's what Anita Shapira wrote, right? The history of Zionism is the history of a rejected suitor. Most early Zionists were assimilated Jews, thought that, okay, we'll assimilate, the tit for tat will become like Christians. Now, so they kind of dissimilate, but they remain very secular. If you think of Herzl, Nordau, and all that. Ben-Gurion, of course. But let's say Ben-Gurion still speaks, he hates it, but still he can know it. Herzl has, nada. I mean, so I think it's a very dialectical case, and Eastern Europe is not like, Western and Central Europe, you have the Reform movement. You have like religious reform. Eastern Europe, it doesn't fly. Reform, they try, the Russian government brings a reform rabbi in 1844, the guy that would later go to Cincinnati, Max Lilienthal. They want to poke his eyes out. Literally, we're going to put a pin in his eye and poke it out. We hate it. They're not Jewish. They're they're German Jews and all that. So assimilation has to do, I think, with this dialectics of reception and rejection.
Chaim, you want to say
בסדר, ב-20 אנחנו נצא לשם.
Does someone have another question?
I have a question for Gil about your sources that you talked about here. I have a few questions about them. So you're looking particularly at these Yiddish diaries, memoirs.
Memoirs.
After the war, for like the 20 years after the war in the United States. And so the first question I have is, why Yiddish? Presumably people were writing also in English in the US at this time, and what's the value of the Yiddish? What's different about the Yiddish? The same, are there comparisons or important differences between the Yiddish and the English? And then, and I wonder also with this, first of all, were they published? Also, are we dealing, and if so, by whom? Like, why was this a thing? Or are we talking about mainly, personal documents? And then the third question is, why were people writing? I would presume that many of these people were writing their memoirs, in particular, because of the Holocaust. And so it wouldn't be a surprise to me that the Holocaust would end up being this kind of reference point. And maybe I'm wrong, so that's what I'm asking.
No, I don't think you're wrong. Let me start with the third one, and I hope I'll remember all of them. So the first, why do they write? It's a great question, and here you have a spectrum of answers. Most of them are people who did something in their life, both in Eastern Europe, but especially in the States, were political activists, were writers, were critics, and all that. They kind of, sum up their lives. So someone like Mukdoini was maybe him and Boris Gorin, maybe the most important Yiddish theater critics. So when he's 70 or 80, okay, let's do it. By that time, when they publish it, the Yiddish market in America is almost gone. So what happens, they publish it in Buenos Aires, in Montevideo, in Mexico City. Now, it doesn't mean they don't have readership in America and a little bit in the land of Israel, depending on if it's Landsmannschaft and Yizkir Bicher, but it's mostly, so they're writing for an immigrant population. Now, and there comes the difference between that and the English language, and I thought I said that, maybe I didn't clarify that. English language memoirists, before the Holocaust, you can definitely see it, but also after the Holocaust, tend to be, they geared toward a more generalized population. So of course they don't expect maybe that non-Jews would read it, but they know they can read it. People who write in Yiddish and Hebrew, and definitely it's true for Yiddish, do not assume that non-Jews would read it, and therefore they can resort to a certain internal language that you usually will not find in the English language memoirs. And the point about the Holocaust and the Yiddish memoirs is that they have a much darker, and again, I'm not talking about survivors. I'm talking about people who did not, were not there. Some of them went back home in the 20s and the 30s, and I think Daniel Sawyer wrote a great article about people who would go. If you read Agnon, Orech, Natal Alon, and Venyash, right, exactly, and Venyash's Gekum and Venyash's Gefor, and by Gladstein, you can see the differences between a Zionist and a diaspora nationalist. But the idea is the people who write post-Holocaust in Yiddish have a much darker, more pessimistic view because they say anti-Semitism, ewig Ezach. This is eternal. The Holocaust is not an aberration. It's simply that's the way the Goyim are, that's the way they're going to remain. The English memoirs, you have that. I'm not saying you don't have that, but they're more upbeat in general. So the medium, the medium is of course important. When you add to that Zionism, many people who, and the Eastern European Zionism, not the Herzlian one, people who say, well, Zionism because Jews cannot live, that's the old Lillenblum formula, either we'll totally assimilate, or they'll continue killing us, or we'll move to our own country. So the Baruch Zuckerman, he continues that. So I hope I answered.
May I suggest a twist on what you said? Because the late 40s, the early 50s, you got a huge industry of Yizkor books. It was full of it. You just have to go to Dorot to see the huge number of them. And most of them were published in the late 40s, let's say 1955, 56. Many of them, by the way, in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. But there was a demand. And if you wanted to write to people that could read some Yiddish, this is the place to do it. So many of the records appear in the, I'll give you just one example. My father came from a small town in Galicia called Tluste. And one of the writers was a famous Hebrew poet, Shimshon Meltzer. And he wrote his piece in Yiddish. He could have written it in Hebrew. And they've got, it's a bilingual because everything was translated into English, but he wrote it in Yiddish. Because many people, I don't know about America, I know much more about what happened here. Many people who came here after the war, and many more who managed to come here before the war, and wrote about what they were feeling a sort of, okay, it was the Nazi who did it. But we left our families, we came here, it could be America, it could be Israel. We left them. We escaped real life, but we left them there. So it's a sort, in this frame of mind, you tend to be much more nostalgic.
Rebecca Cobrin wrote about Bialik. So there is a difference between American Yizkor Bicher and Israeli Yizkor Bicher. Now the thing is, some of the Landsmannschaften are international. So you have people from, I don't know, my grandparents, Svir in Lithuania, Ayaratenu Svir. So they write only Yiddish and Hebrew, because the Israeli Landsmannschaft produced the book, not the American one. But sometimes if the Kehillah was big enough, they will have 3 languages. And then you can see, they pick and choose, and you can see variations between the American participants and the Israeli participants.
All 2 different books.
Definitely, yes.
And sometimes it's ideological, the Zionists take out and the diaspora nationalists take out.
There is no Buddhist in this and that.
Exactly, and Israeli one don't have any Buddhist in their story.
And may I suggest one more point? We have to go to the bus, it's waiting to take us to Apple. But when you talk about Yiddish and you talk about America, you have to remember that though people from Europe came to America before the Holocaust, it was after the Holocaust that the American Yiddish, the Yiddish, the intellectual Yiddish became, Heschel was there, others were there. So I think that you should look into the role of Yivo in the 50s, 1950s America to understand more about this, because Yivo was a Yiddish culture, a definite Yiddish culture.
There's a new book about Marcus Kram.
Yeah,
He just wrote and published a book about that, the role of, I know.
Okay.